Another action-packed college football weekend. Saturday, some really good games. Sunday, some really big moments. Even got rumors spilling out now on Monday as we record this. John Reed, Jesse Simonton. Let's talk some ball. How are you, Jesse?
I'm good, man. I'm good. What rumors we got? What we cooking?
Well, just with Florida State, I guess that's the latest, right? Florida State and whether or not they are ponying up for Norvell, or else they're going to basically ask the fans, hey, give us some more NIL money and we'll just make the roster better. Same for Cincinnati, or not, excuse me, not Cincinnati, Wisconsin. Of course, Luke Fickell's old team, Cincinnati. But, yeah, Wisconsin saying the same thing in terms of, hey, we're behind this coach. You should also consider giving some money to us in our NIL, please.
I kind of think both of those situations are tethered similarly, where their AD put out a statement voicing the proverbial vote of confidence, and yet I think come year's end, but neither of those ADs, McIntosh at Wisconsin and Alford at Florida State, are actually going to be the decision makers of whether A, they're firing or hiring a new head coach, and B, whether those guys even have a job. I think this could be a come December, those guys that made this statement today are walking out the door with the head coaches that the fans want too. For Florida State, I mean, I think it's pretty simple, right? It's, can they find $50 million under the couch cushions? Because they're a university that has cried poor in recent years. They have been linked to a lot of this private equity Saudi money stuff, whether that ends up coming to fruition or not. If they have the money, John, they have to get rid of them. 1 in 11 since they sued the conference where they said, hey, ACC, we're better than you. And now they've gone 1 in 11.
They used to pop up in a lot of our SEC discussions. Florida State fans would, beating their chests after knocking off Alabama, but that has gone by the wayside as the year has gone on. That continues to be just such a head scratcher, where for one game Florida State was good and Ty Simpson and Alabama looked lost, and now, of course, that couldn't be further from opposite of where we're at as we sit here in Week 8.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if we want to spin it to a different gig, I mean, Florida is obviously open. Not a surprise that news came out on Sunday. I don't know how much you actually caught any of that Mississippi State game. I know you were in T-Town watching the Vols. So that game, was happening at the same time that you were probably walking into the stadium. So
all I know is that they won, and they won kind of, unimpressively, with getting an interception at the end, and something about a missed field goal that was actually a made field goal that Mississippi State kind of got screwed on. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good summation. I mean, it was a dirt fest. That's what it was. I mean, it was a fat guy interception that won Florida the game. The Gators in Billy Napier, sometimes you just got a bit of do the way you kind of came in the door, and that's getting penalized for not having enough people on the field or too many men on the field, on a special teams play, questionable play calling when they should have been putting the game away. It was obviously a very coordinated leak, in the middle of the week when all those reports from various people came out that no matter the result on Saturday against Mississippi State, that Napier was going to get fired. It was almost as if they were just kind of saying, whether that was a push for Scott Strickland, the AD, to say, hey, we're gonna force your hand here, or if it again was just kind of like, hey, let's go ahead and get this news out there so that it can look like we're joining Penn State early on this line for a new head coach. Not a surprise, and now I think and you've seen everybody on Twitter to everywhere kind of arguing what sort of job Florida is. I think that's kind of how we could spin this thing forward.
I did kind of appreciate that Florida's just like, hey, I know we're probably not going to lose to Mississippi State, but just so you know, we're still firing you. We're treating it as a loss. Like, just for some reason we didn't fire you the week before, but hey, like, we're going to fire you regardless. So good luck. Don't be surprised. It's not a win or lose type of situation, you're out regardless. And now Florida comes to the table. Do you have them ahead of, equal to, behind Penn State when it comes to openings?
So I think that it's a great question, because I think if you ask this question, so this is where Florida's at, John. They're on their fifth coach since Urban. They're in the market for their fifth coach since Urban. Billy Napier is unequivocally the worst of those last four coaches. He was worse than Muschamp, he was worse than McElwain, and he was definitely worse than Mullen. And yet, 5 years ago, when Florida was open, it was unequivocally a top 10 job. It is not a top 10 job today. The LSU, people would call on broken glass if Brian Kelly gets fired at LSU. That's not happening at Florida. Georgia, Ohio State, those sorts of programs, all better. You could make the case, obviously, Notre Dame, Michigan, where Oklahoma fits in, A&M. The point is that there's kind of this odd intersection where Florida is no longer a top 10 job, and Billy Napier is the worst coach they've had since Urban Meyer. And yet the program is better positioned today, I believe, to compete for a national championship than it has ever been in the history of Florida. And that seems wild to say, but when you know what's kind of gone on behind the scenes at Florida, their infrastructure now is so much better. They have the NIL ducks in a row. The money, whether it's from the boosters, investments, what have you, the money is there. They are now kind of culling. A year ago, I wrote this big column at On3 about that Florida has more than just a Billy Napier problem. And the problem was behind the scenes at the administrative level. There was all these ghosts of the Jeremy Foley era that were just kind of hanger-ons. It was the Peter principle that they were all in positions that they could not actually handle. Those people are now being culled out. And so it's kind of a weird deal where Florida, maybe Penn State's definitely a top 10 job and Florida's not. But Florida, I think, is actually as better, if not better, positioned today to go, if they get the hire right, compete for a championship again. And so that means, are they better than Penn State? I don't know, but I do think that they're going to be more attractive to a person like Lane Kiffin if he would choose to leave Ole Miss.
Yeah, just on face value, it seemed surprising to me to see you say that, or to tweet it out and then to say it again here on the episode, mostly just because I think back to the 90s and the mid-2000s when they were set up in an SEC that they could clearly boast that they had a bunch of advantages over and had a setup to where they could get a couple of those big recruiting classes and be set as the top dog or one of the 2 or 3 top dogs in the conference. It doesn't feel that way to me right now with really any school. It feels like everyone's got money. Everyone's got these resources, maybe to varying degrees, but
I think we're actually agreeing though, John, because my point is that part of the reason why Florida has I think just been kind of riding this roller coaster for the last 15 years is because they didn't have the investments. They didn't have the money. They were just kind of living on their laurels of, well, Spurrier did it without an indoor facility. Well, Urban won without having, these fancy football-only fields and that kind of stuff. And eventually that caught up to them. So now, yeah, you're right. I mean, what we're seeing at Indiana proves your point. Everybody's got money. You can be at the worst program in the history of college football and win. So that's why it doesn't really matter whether it's a top 10 job or whatever. I just think that Florida, ironically, as bad as Napier was, is actually better positioned today than it was when he got the job 4 years ago.
Okay. I mean, we're kind of saying the same thing, but again, my point was just, you could have told me, 10, 15, 20 years ago, they were a top 3 job in the SEC, which put them in the national, championship conversation. And now, it feels like 1 through 8, or at least 3 through 8 are all just kind of jumbled up there together. But like you said, if you get the right hire in place, then you have the resources that you need to go do it. So I see it from both sides. And if you're Florida, is it Lane Kiffin first? Is that the home run hire in your opinion, or who should Florida be calling?
Well, they should call Marcus Freeman. I absolutely believe that. I think Marcus Freeman's going to say no because I think Notre Dame is a better job, and I think he's probably only going to leave for either Ohio State or the NFL if that does come happening. But you got to give him a call. There's no reason for Scott Strickland not to give him a call. And then the Lane Kiffin thing just makes sense because from a personality standpoint, from a Florida fans really want Steve Spurrier reincarnated. I mean, that there is no Steve Spurrier 2.0, but if there was in the modern era, it's Lane. I mean, he's cocky. He's going to talk shit. He is, he's not rocking the visor anymore, but he used to rock a visor, and he coaches, a fun offense. And so he checks a lot of boxes there. I think Florida could do way worse than Eli Drinkowitz. I don't know how you feel about that. But Florida fans, that does not, I can tell you this from knowing a ton of Florida fans and talking to a bunch of Florida people, Florida fans are not excited about Eli Drinkowitz, which is funny because he's kind of like the poor man's Lane Kiffin. He's kind of like Spurrier if Spurrier had a little less bite.
Were they excited about Billy Napier being hired years ago? Was that a name? Because, I remember Billy being a hot candidate, but I didn't remember Florida's reaction to him.
I think that they talked themselves into it because they believe that he kind of had this, big blueprint that, he wasn't just a Saban guy. He had, the Dabo ties and the Saban ties, and he'd kind of done it on his own at Louisiana. But there was also some Florida folks, and I'm not a Florida folk, but there was some people like myself that were also kind of throwing up the red light of, I do think it speaks volumes that Billy Napier was in Louisiana. LSU had an opening at the exact same time, and they didn't even give him the time of day. Now, they may be regretting their own hire that cycle, which I have a column up laughing about at Substack right now. Do we like our coach? They're mad as hell at Brian Kelly, but I think they probably got that one right. They didn't even sniff Billy Napier, even though he was doing well at Louisiana. He was Florida's number one choice, and 4 years later, they both could be in the market for another head coach.
Yeah, that's why, from a Tennessee perspective, I looked at Billy Napier as a pretty good case scenario. I won't say best case scenario from a, not letting Florida get an advantage over Tennessee, but I looked at him and people, praised him as a recruiter for what he did at Louisiana and his record at Louisiana. But I was like, hey, there's a kind of the second game in that state, right? If you're a 3-star in Louisiana, and there's a bunch of them, you should be going to his school. And it just felt like he had such an advantage over his peers. And then I'd watch them, and just the offense didn't feel innovative, and it's kind of the way it played out. But I will say that there are a handful of guys in this cycle that would scare me from a Tennessee perspective if Florida was able to go and get one of those guys. And Drinkwitz might be the floor at that, but I do think Drinkwitz would be pretty good at Florida. That's a pretty good floor if that's the actual floor.
Who would scare you the most?
Who would scare me the most? Well, obligated to say Nick Saban, but I think you've ultimately been right on that. His name hasn't popped up seriously for any coaching hires, but if I'm Florida, at least, hey, you sure, coach? You sure you're not interested in this? But outside of him, Lane would be the most annoying. Just the Florida swagger, if he brought that, that would be annoying. He hasn't done that as much at Ole Miss, but if he leaned in towards being the villain at Florida, that would be annoying. That's kind of the only one to me that stands out. Drinkwitz, I think, would be good. Marcus Freeman, I don't view that as realistic.
How do you feel about Jeff Brom?
Yeah, I think Brom's a winner. I think Brom's a winner. I was fired up when Tennessee was going to hire him in 2017. I think just what he did to Miami is pretty, was pretty impressive. Great call on Christopher. He's always good for one of those. But to me, I just don't see the fit with a lot of these coaches. And I just don't know if I'm one of these coaches that maybe would be good there, Jesse. To me, unless you're one of the very, very top guys, you just know you're already walking in fighting uphill. The Florida fans wouldn't be excited if they hired Jeff Brom. And if you don't have that initial buy-in, I think it's just going to be really, really tough to actually be successful somewhere.
No, you're right. I mean, just like I don't think Florida fans would be inspired or excited about a guy like Brent Key, who I think he might be Mario Cristobal, but without the brain farts on Saturdays. And
so if you're those guys that got, I don't know if you leave the places you're at if you're those guys. Like, you have to kind of have a little self-awareness to be like, hey, I'm not going to be accepted there. You saw it firsthand when Tennessee was going to hire Dave Doran. Like, Dave Doran kind of saw the writing on the wall. It's like, I might be able to win there, but they already hate me. I'm just going to stay put. I'm just going to stay where I'm happy and where they like me. And he's kept that job, somehow 8 years later. So I think if I'm any of those coaches we talked about, hey, I'm good making millions of dollars and being liked here.
Yeah, and I think a guy like Drinkowitz is going to have other options too. That they're, depending on what happens with Penn State, obviously the Matt Rule candidacy, it already looked kind of silly to me in the first place. But then when you go out and lay an egg on a short week that was the most predictable thing ever. I joked about that on this pod a week ago, and then that ends up happening. I mean, I would say this about Florida in this job in particular, and it's a bigger microcosm thing for, I think, these coaching candidates and open jobs. But it is kind of funny that, to your point, like, it's going to take a certain SOB to want to come in here, whether the fans want them or not, to win at Florida. And so the fact that Billy Napier didn't work out and was a G5 coach from Louisiana means that they're automatically not going to basically talk or even think about a guy like John Sumrall, who's a really good coach and I think is going to be a quality SEC coach. That means I think that they're not even going to sniff Alex Golesh. Who,
I think if Alex Golesh, I think if he beats Memphis down, he might have enough of that swagger to be okay being their sixth choice and coming in and doing it.
I think Golesh would embrace it full-throated, but I just don't think he's going to get a look because I think it's bad process. Again, I'm more criticizing the process that Florida is almost going to box themselves in where they have to get, the biggest name they can that's a certifiable, GUI because Franklin? They don't.
Does Franklin fit that bill? Franklin seemed pretty fired up on game day. Now, I think he exaggerated about all the big games they've won at Penn State, but he said, hey, I'm going to go win a national championship somewhere else. And Florida is a place, obviously, you can win a national championship at. So I'm curious about the fit there.
Yeah, that's a terrible fit. And I'm someone that I don't think fit necessarily. I think fit is a little overused in these coaching. I mean, no one thought Nick Saban was a fit when he went to LSU and won. Urban seemed like kind of an odd fit based on his background when he got to Florida and had it cooking immedately. Fit is all relative. But Franklin, I think if, I don't know about you, but I think if you put Dan Mullen from Florida at Penn State the entire time that James Franklin was there, I bet Dan Mullen has almost the exact same results, maybe even better. So my point is, I don't think Franklin's is going to be some sort of massive upgrade on what Florida's chasing. B, his biggest problem is his offense stinks and he can't win big games. That was kind of Billy's problem. Florida fans are not really interested in signing up for that. I think Franklin's destined for the ACC. Whether it's Franklin Street, UNC, Va Tech would be an interesting choice. If Maryland fires Loxley, Franklin was, formerly the coach in waiting there. I could see that happening. I don't think one of these big blue blood programs is going to hire James Franklin. Could be wrong, but I would be stunned if Florida even entertained that avenue.
You wrote on Surrender Cobra, a check-in to see, who actually likes their coach. After this weekend, I will say here in Knoxville, there's been a little bit more rumblings about Josh Heupel having hit his ceiling in Knoxville. Do you feel like the Tennessee fan base should be happy with their coach currently after the embarrassment that was the third Saturday in October?
Yeah, that was a tough game. I mean, that's also one of those situations too, where the 14-point swing at the end of the half, how does that change? Obviously, the rest of the game. I think it was bad process because why are you running play action there when you obviously aren't going to run the ball with the one final play in the half? And yet, if Aguilar makes a good throw, a touchdown was there. So it might have been bad process, but it was also just bad execution. I think you probably believe this as well. Tennessee's going to give Josh Heupel a long rope because of how he kind of quickly navigated them out of the mess of the Jeremy Pruitt era. But that doesn't mean that some fans aren't wrong that he may be bumping his head up on the ceiling, that there is kind of a cap with both the offensive limitations. As explosive and dynamic it can be, it can also be figured out. And we've kind of seen that in some of these big games.
It's just funny to me, and you're right. Look, Josh Heupel's not getting fired, short of losing to New Mexico State and losing all the rest of his games. That's not going to happen. It was more so just a fan base vibe check, because it's funny to me how all offseason, especially, as the season kind of progressed, heading into the season, you looked and said, hey, lost your quarterback in the spring. Let's just be exciting. 9-3 is a pretty good season. Like, hey, it's not his fault his quarterback left, yada, yada, yada. You turn around, you lose to Georgia. Now, look, I think the Georgia game was a game that you blew coaching, and then you lost to Alabama, which I think was a game you blew with your players, is the kind of way I looked at it. Players cost you the Alabama game. Coaching cost you the Georgia game. But even then, I feel pretty okay that Tennessee still has a 10-2 schedule staring them in the face. Now, whether or not they can take advantage of that is yet to be seen. But I've just been shocked, both nationally leading into the Alabama game and kind of, locally with fans coming out of that game, just how kind of down people were on Tennessee. Again, based on how in the offseason everyone kind of thought 9 wins would be a pretty good season. 10 you'd be doing backflips for after you were scrambling for a quarterback and you got one off the trash heap in Joey Aguilar.
Yeah, I think the other issue, John, is that, I mean, you're right that 10-2 is absolutely navigable. But the problem is that you could say 8-4 is quite possible too.
Yeah.
Just because I think that, you drew the parallel a week ago, I think, of, the SEC snow globe, and you shake it up. And I mean, what Vanderbilt did to LSU on Saturday was not surprising in the least. They bullied them from, the first snap. It is not, the most electrifying thing. Diego Pavia is certainly electrifying, but it's just kind of methodical, slow execution on every play. That's something that Tennessee is going to have to go up against. They're going to have to go up against that Oklahoma defensive line that just, put Lenora Sellers and that South Carolina offensive line in a meat grinder. So Tennessee gets, they get a nice, I would say that one would think they get a nice, reprieve this weekend, although Kentucky did. Especially if you saw that analytics, I don't know if you saw the Parker Statso War, how bad did we get beat? Basically, Kentucky blew it against Texas, and about as badly as way possible as you could imagine. They should have won that game 10 different ways and didn't. So Tennessee may have a fight on their hands, but they also could be seeing a team that's getting ready to lay down, and Kentucky may be figuring out how to find a bag full of money to get rid of Mark Stoops.
Yeah, add that to the list of rumors, is that basically Kentucky, the money's there and they're getting it all ready and things are changing behind the scenes. So we'll see if the players come out and try to rally for their coach or not. Yeah, like Tennessee might lose to Kentucky this week. They might lose to Oklahoma. You could tell me they lose to Florida and Vandy. But my bigger point is just Tennessee's still going to be favored, I think, in every one of their remaining games. Now, that doesn't mean you always win, and just being favored in all of them isn't enough. But
OU's in Neyland, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And Tennessee will be favored in that game by at least a field goal and a half. But they got to play better. I thought that Alabama, it's week 5 of me saying this, week 6 of me saying this. They're really good, I just don't know if they're great, but they keep making winning plays, and Tennessee, couldn't really test them. And I give Ty Simpson and that offense credit, and I give Tennessee and the defense blame. Every time Tennessee, would try to be in a position to get a stop, at least on the last two drives, you couldn't do it. They went on long, methodical drives, and Ty Simpson just made the big plays. And I thought that DeBoer and Grubb really schemed up some good offensive stuff. And some stuff that I saw on Saturday, I noticed seeing again on Sunday. So I thought they had some good NFL concepts, and they just kind of did what they were supposed to do. Didn't really make too many mistakes outside of the one fumble that had Simpson kind of had slip through his hands.
Well, and you called it a week ago with saying that you really thought that they would really kind of choke the ball, and they ultimately kind of did. I mean, there wasn't a ton of explosive plays. But it's just first down, hold it, first down. Ryan Williams kind of came out of his shell or whatever, witness protection he's been in for a couple weeks. He kind of came out of that, which was good to see. Not good to see for a Vol fan, but good to see just for college football, because he kind of, was one of the preseason stars who I don't think has exactly lived up to such, hype thus far. But look, Tennessee is in there's that SEC ites that we talked about a week ago. Tennessee's right there. And if they can handle business, you're right. The Vols will be 10-2, or at worst, I think, let's say they're 9-2, playing for a potential playoff game against Vandy in the finale. I mean, that really could be a playoff elimination game for both of those teams in the series finale, which would be crazy for that rivalry.
It would be fun. I think all Tennessee fans would lock that in right now if that was the case. I think we'd all be good with that being an elimination game. I'd lock it in inside there. You talked about elimination games. So whenever you sent that, you were looking deep in the season, or were we talking this week? Because there's some big ones coming up this weekend too, that I think, like, from a Tennessee perspective, I got a lot of rooting interest in, with, Oklahoma, playing Ole Miss, and with, Missouri traveling to Vandy. I think from a Tennessee perspective, it's kind of funny because it feels like the SEC is kind of split up, at least when I look at it from a Tennessee side. Like, hey, Vandy and Oklahoma, they're on our schedule. And then there's a whole other side of the conference that's not on your schedule, with, like, Texas and LSU and Missouri and Ole Miss. So, like, from a Vol standpoint, I'm rooting for those teams to lose because you don't get a chance to play them. I'm rooting for the teams on Tennessee's schedule to win so that you get a chance for a signature win or to handle business yourself. When you look at this upcoming weekend, which games stand out to you?
Yeah, you just named a couple of them. I guess when we were texting, I was thinking about this weekend as maybe a playoff elimination, but the more I kind of thought about it, maybe it's more of just kind of like a separation Saturday, because I think if, like, Ole Miss loses at Oklahoma, they are not out, because of the rest of their schedule is extremely favorable compared to the rest of the SEC. So they definitely could go 10-2. But I do think it's a separation Saturday, and I think,
I was going to say you're being a little dramatic with elimination, but I do think it's, like I said, like, one side of the conference can set themselves up. The other side of the conference can still kind of be there with two losses, but obviously puts their back against the wall.
Right. I think
only LSU. Only LSU is the only one I look at. LSU, and then, of course, Texas, Tennessee, can't lose at Kentucky. But for all those one-loss teams, I don't think it's elimination at all.
Yeah, and for LSU, if they lose,
might be elimination for Brian Kelly at that point.
That's the joke I was gonna. I mean, that's as toxic as it is in Baton Rouge. That could get real nasty. So that one's crazy. Against A&M, that's in Baton Rouge. They got to win that game. They have to win that game. The Tigers do. But I think game day, going to Nashville, that Missouri Vandy game. Why not Vanderbilt? That's going to be a huge one. Missouri, I think, getting off the deck with kind of an ugly win at Auburn. There's just a cap on that. We were bragging about Eli and the offense and that kind of stuff. I love Ahmad Hardy. I think Coleman, the receiver, the transfer they got, is really good. There's just a cap on what Bo Pribula can offer you as a passer. And so I think there really is a ceiling on kind of Missouri's potential this season. Damian Wilson, whatever they paid him to leave Georgia to go that 5-star, I mean, he has just been a beast, probably arguably the best pass rusher in the SEC this year. Tennessee should handle business against Kentucky. They'll go get their, get the bucket, bring it out. They'll win that one.
Just laughing. It's a barrel, first of all.
Beer barrel, excuse me.
Yeah, beer barrel. We had to get rid of it because a player died, but we still talk about it. It's funny that Missouri just Charlie Browned Hugh Freeze and Auburn again. Just like Auburn just, here you go. Here's going to be your win. Nope, sorry. No, it's not. You're still going to lose. You're going to find a way to lose.
He was the third of those coaches right? Today.
Yeah.
Well, he was the third of those coaches, I think, on Monday that their AD kind of came out and was like, we're behind them. We'll see how long that lasts.
I mean, it feels, you talk about elimination games, Brian Kelly, it feels like an elimination game for Hugh Freeze as they go to Fayetteville to play Arkansas. Like, you lose to Arkansas, you lose to Bobby Petrino, like, you got to pull the plug there. Like, you have to pull the plug there if you're Auburn.
I'm kind of stunned that they haven't done it already. You lose 4 in a row with what they invested in that roster, with the expectations that Hugh openly. I think you know what's funny.
Hugh told us. Hugh said, "Hey, if we make a bowl game, that's an accomplishment." He tried to say it, and everyone roasted him for it.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. So he got roasted for saying if we just make a bowl game. So then at SEC Media Days, he went hard and was like, "This is a playoff team. We should be in the playoff." And then you win week 1 at Baylor, and he's puffing his chest again and talking about God is good. And now he's praying to the heavens that he's able just to keep his job for 26. Because if Hugh gets cooked here, I think this is I do not see him getting another P4 job again. He'll go coach at Memphis or something like that, but. He's done it in terms of leading the big boy program because he has gotten the quarterback position so wrong 3 times in a row now that it's just that's supposed to be his baby, and to screw that up, that's right on you.
Now with Auburn and Arkansas both, obviously more so with Auburn because they're in this scenario, but do you look at the landscape and maybe try to be honest about where you are in the pecking order? Because, if I'm Auburn, most years we're a top 3 or 4 opening, I would say, or at least, maybe even top 2. This year, I feel like if you're to the market trying to hire a coach, you're like 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th best, depending on how, people view and what other jobs come open and how people view the hecticness of your program. I think maybe it would behoove a couple of these programs not to be competing against some of the bigger boys.
See, I think for Auburn – I'm going to push back on that one because
okay.
I think if Hugh gets fired, I think Auburn has several natural guys that they could target quite quickly that other schools may not be interested in. Just again, whether it's optics, whether it's you can't hire the same guy that you just fired or similar background or whatever. I think John Sumrall would kill it at Auburn.
Okay.
And so he has an SEC background. He is, a legitimate, accumulator of talent, recruiter, really good defensive mind. I think you pair him with a quality offensive coordinator and he's able to retain some of that roster. And Auburn is, well positioned to at least compete. Not saying that they're definitely going to win. But I think that would be a strong hire. Auburn, I think, frankly, could do way worse than James Franklin. I don't think that's a real fit, but I don't think he's going to, again, I think he's going to be in the SEC circles. But Rhett Lashley, that's another one. I think Auburn could do well with a guy like Rhett Lashley.
Summerall wouldn't take the Kentucky job, would he? I mean, he coached there. He's had a couple stints there. That's where he got his start as a GA.
His alma mater.
Yeah, he got to start there. Played football there. Yeah. Okay, yeah. I was looking up. I just saw he was from Texas, but so him.
No, that's his alma mater.
Okay, so would he take the Kentucky job in your opinion? Because that's kind of scary.
So I think word on the street from folks who know that when Mark Stoops, for that brief 24 hours, was set to become Texas A&M's head coach before their board of regents pulled a John Reed and said no, and did the Shiano. John Summerall was set to leave his job at Troy to go become the head coach at Kentucky. He then Mark Stoops then obviously gets reneged. He stays at Kentucky. John Summerall does end up ultimately leaving Troy, and that's when he gets the job at Tulane to replace Willie Fritz. I would be surprised. I think he's Kentucky's number one target. I think if Kentucky moves on from Stoops, they are going to go all in on John Summerall. I just think Summerall is going to say, hey, if I'm going to be patient, and if Auburn's open and we're in the mix for a playoff, I can afford to be patient. I think he chooses the Plains over Bourbon Country because, again, you're set up way better to win at Auburn. Whereas if you get that Kentucky job, you're probably getting it to get fired.
Yeah, he outgrew the opening. Like, hey, alma mater's cool, but like I can do better.
Right.
Would be interesting though. I mean, I know Nebraska and Kentucky aren't necessarily comparable, but Scott Frost is like, all right, I guess I'll go home. I'll go be an idiot, and then ruin my career. Go tank that. But yeah, if you're Kentucky, I understand the pipe dream there. It's one of those things like I was talking about. You're late, and now like Kentucky, if they were to be, in the market, they are far, far down the list. But maybe that would be the case for them pretty much at any time.
I think there's be careful what you wish for that's happening in Columbia, South Carolina right now. Those fans are getting quite sick of Shane. Shane is getting testy on the mic in these post games. They got Alabama this weekend. If those losses keep piling up, I know Shane keeps saying that, he loves South Carolina and this is his dream job and all that, but he does have an escape hatch if he wants it. Vatek is sitting there waiting for him. If he puts up the sign or puts up the boombox, and has them standing outside his doorway.
Do you think we're headed for a reckoning with coaching contracts? Just like, with the way that was a narrative before, Signetti got his big contract. It was like, hey, people might be a little bit more cautious. And then it's like, actually, here you go, Signetti.
It lasted 3 days.
Yeah.
It lasted 3 days. We memory hold this shit so bad. No, I do not think there's going to be – coaches are not going to start making less money anytime soon. The fact that people wrote all those columns talking about buyouts and, we can't do this and can't do that – that James Franklin's getting $50 million not to work and all this. And then Kurt Signetti, what he's done at Indiana, we have been on record multiple times. It's unbelievable. It's historic. It's remarkable. He's 63 years old, and they just gave him like a 10-year extension that's worth $94 million guaranteed. We're bad at this.
I would say Signetti has, ultimate leverage, but hell, I guess any of these schools and any of these coaches that get any type of interest, like Lane Kiffin, if Ole Miss is serious, they'll have to pay him, into the $12 million range to keep him away from these other schools. Like he'd be in the same boat.
Oh, and let's circle back to Lane for a second. I think that's a good conversation. You're absolutely right. And Lane has both of those schools over the barrel now because he's got so much leverage that everyone in their mother knows that he's Florida's number one guy and that every fan in Gainesville is dying that Lane Kiffin becomes the new head coach. And then he has the thing cooking at Ole Miss where his daughter's still there. He seems happy. He seems like he has a nice relationship with their administration. Their NIL game is as good as any. So if he does stay, he's going to get one of these God contracts too. My question, John, for you, what should Lane do? What do you think he will do?
It's funny because Lane's made such a show out of like talking about happiness and not chasing happiness and just being where you're at and being loyal and all these things and how his daughter talked him out of leaving and how she wanted to be at Ole Miss and blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, I do feel like if you're a coach, you have goals. I do think you have ultimate confidence and you want to reach the absolute mountaintop, the apex. I think Tennessee baseball is kind of dealing with with that right now with Tony Vitello trying to decide whether or not he wants to get into Major League Baseball, because I think when kids are growing up, they dream of being Major League Baseball managers more so than like college baseball coaches. I think you're dealing with that. And I think if you're Lane Kiffin, you probably grew up wanting to be at, probably 5 or 10 different schools. Maybe you had a list of 5 or 10, or at the very least you wanted to be somewhere where you could win a national championship. So like, I feel like if I'm Lane, I'm being honest with myself, I got a much better chance of winning a national championship at Florida than I do Ole Miss. And I think everyone would agree with that. It'd be really hard for me not to turn down one of those jobs. Like if it was one of those top 5 or 6 jobs that you could walk in and have actual advantages to win a national championship, it's still going to be easier to recruit to Florida than it would be to Ole Miss. I think I would take the job. Especially like we're talking about, especially if like the buyout, the punishment for failing is like get $70 million to go away or whatever it is.
I think too, I joked about the coordinated leaks that happened with Billy a week ago, preempting his firing before it actually happened, almost like speaking it into existence because he'd somehow survived 9 lives the previous year and a half where they couldn't fire him. I think a lot of what Lane has done publicly has been fairly coordinated too. That E60 documentary that came out about everything that he's changed in his life and all that, that was I like Lane, but that was still a nice whitewashing of some of the ills that he has kind of done, during his various coaching stops. I think the fact that he has been, on game day on Saturday, it was like the image of him walking out onto the field with Jimmy Sexton. CAA is navigating all this behind the scenes.
I cringed when I saw that. I thought that was pretty gross.
Yeah, and so it's and for very quick meta insider stuff for folks. Jimmy Sexton and CAA run college football. Most super fans know this, but the casuals may not. But that they are the athletic directors and whatnot may seem like they're choosing the coach, but the guy that's really making these power play moves is Jimmy Sexton. He's up there, representing Nick Saban, who's on game day, who's interviewing James Franklin, who's a CAA agent or coach, talking about how it was so sad and sorry that he got fired and he didn't deserve it. I mean, it's all very intertwined and kind of meta in that regard. And so I think a lot of what Lane has done has been calculated, and that makes me tend to believe that he would leave. And like you said, I also
think Lane likes attention, though. I will say that. I do think he likes attention. And I do think it would probably make him feel really good, Jesse, to be able to turn down any of these jobs. Like if Florida did come crawling and he could say no, I think that would be such an ego boost to him as well, though. So like I think Lane cares about Lane first and foremost.
Well, there you go. Well, hey, we're going to find out. It
also goes back to just – go ahead.
Well, I was just going to – last thought there. His AD is pushing very publicly to try to give him a Curt Cignetti-type contract at Ole Miss.
It comes back to what we talked about last week. I just don't know how some of these coaches are going to actually survive taking these jobs and quitting on their team. Like halfway – like – as the season's still going. Like Lane Kiffin, I know they lost to Georgia, but still right there in the thick of the playoff race. Like, how is that going to happen with the transfer portal schedule, with the playoff schedule? Like, how do you justify that if you're him or you're Drinkwitz or any of these other coaches?
Well, I think they will be benefited this year, John, by a couple things. One, the playoff is going to, because it's so damn long now, you can play in that first week of the playoff and the portal still isn't even open.
Right.
And so you could coach that game for Ole Miss and then accept the Florida job the next day.
But the high school recruiting still ends in December, right? I mean, that still happens.
It does, but Lane doesn't care about that. Some of these coaches don't care about that. And so it's a very tight window, 100%. But it's not impossible. I
just don't know how you do that with high school kids, though. Like, I just don't know how you keep your class from falling apart if you're Florida if you don't have a coach named by the middle of December. Like, that's just crazy to me. Like, that's the whole point of firing these coaches early, is to try to get somebody in place. So it's not just Florida. I think it's any school that's interested in these coaches. Like, you kind of want the hire made by November, but these guys are still going to be coaching, and some maybe in more high profile games than others.
Well, and that's why it's depending on what happens over the next couple of weeks, it's going to sort itself out. You know, if some of these coaches are eliminated from playoff competition. Penn State don't have to worry about that if they really want Matt Rule, because he's not going to be in the mix for anything coming the end of the year.
Well, I was going to say,
if they want somebody better, then they're going to have to wait too.
But I think that played into what happened at Nebraska. I think they laid an egg because their coach is openly, like, flirting and not denying that he is interested in Penn State. Like, I think that 100% hurt them on Friday.
Yeah. And, look, and we talked about at the very beginning of this episode, if Florida State comes open, if Wisconsin comes open, Auburn, obviously, I mean, there's going to be some big time jobs where some school, hypothetically, if Florida State comes open, how does Kenny Dillingham handle that? Because I think he's going to be, number one on that wish list for the Seminoles to kind of bring back the former offensive coordinator, the guy who's been successful now at Arizona State. Arizona State may be in the mix for a playoff, berth again.
Are they still alive? I thought I'd written them off weeks ago. Are they still alive?
They beat Texas Tech on Saturday. They just have
I had a busy day going on.
Yeah, that was a huge upset.
I saw that. Okay.
So they're in the mix. I mean, the Big 12 is going to be carnage, just like a lot of these conferences. But I'll tell you the one that we teased it earlier. But if LSU comes open, that's going to be kind of the mushroom cloud for this entire deal, in my opinion, because that is the type of job that coaches, a Marcus Freeman or some of these other coaches, may actually crawl on broken glass to go take.
Yeah, I mean, you already saw it with Brian Kelly, leaving Notre Dame to go there. If you're Penn State, you're not interested in Brian Kelly at all, are you?
No.
Yeah. Okay. You want to hear something sad?
Go for it.
This just came out, while we've been recording about 15
Tennessee
minutes
Titans
ago.
Going to hire Brian Kelly?
I don't want to talk about the Titans ever, really. I don't even want to think about them. I'm more so looking forward to my Atlanta Hawks tomorrow. Thank you. I was in a good mood thinking about my basketball team. Nate Ament here in Knoxville. I'm about ready to switch to basketball season the next time the Vols take a loss. But no, Hugh Freeze says he would like to get a public vote of support from Auburn AD. Quote, it would be huge, he says. So he is basically openly campaigning. Please tell me that you love me. Please tell everybody. Post me online. Please let everybody know you still believe in me. And that's pretty depressing, actually. And the picture they're using, he's holding his hands out like, please hug me.
That makes it even funnier when it was just 4 or 5 days ago that Joe Cohen, their AD, gave that just ridiculously stupid and silly metaphor about Hugh Freeze, saying it's akin to starting my car and not sure if my car's going to start in the garage, but I hope it does. But if it doesn't, then that means I know I got to go take it to a mechanic or something. I mean, I think the car's showing you that it either ain't starting or it's out of gas or there's some problems, and you probably need to go get a fresh engine in there.
Please give me a vote of confidence, a vote of public support. That's depressing. That's depressing. All right, on the way out, what else do you want to hit? I hit a couple of the questions some listeners asked. Let's see if there's anything else we need to get to. Let me check. Is there anything you have on your mind, Jesse, you want to get on record on wax?
I guess I'm curious to see. I think the most interesting game in the SEC on Saturday is Oklahoma-Ole Miss. I know game day's going to Missouri-Vandy. We talked about that a little bit. I think that's going to be a quality kind of separation deal for one of those two programs. But Oklahoma kind of found a run game on Saturday. Was that just because they played South Carolina and a beat-up defensive line, no Dylan Stewart? Or is this still just kind of a one-man band on offense where it's a one-man band with a guy with a broken hand and John Napier and a defense that is legitimately scary. I think Brent Venables has that defense cooking. I mean, those guys up front, Stone and the like, I mean, they just hound people with that defensive line. They're forcing turnovers. I think they had 13 tackles for loss on Saturday. But again, how much is that playing South Carolina? Well, now we're going to get to see them going up against, Trinidad Chambliss and an Ole Miss offense that has some real giddy up. So I think that is the most fascinating SEC game this weekend.
I was surprised to see Oklahoma as 4.5-point favorites.
That's just got to be because they're at home, right? I mean, I think that's got to be a big part of it.
It still seemed a little bit – because, I mean, like 4.5 implies, depends on the venue, depends on the stakes, but home field's worth anywhere from 2 points to 3.5 points. So that's them saying that Oklahoma's better on a neutral site than Ole Miss, and I didn't really feel that way coming into this week.
Yeah, don't you feel like now? What's funny, you could throw back the Miami result in my face immediately, or even Oregon losing to Indiana. But I feel like schools are having harder times on the road this year than maybe they have in typical seasons.
That's interesting because I felt the opposite. I felt the opposite last week. At least in the big games. Like Georgia beating Tennessee, Alabama beating Georgia. A&M.
Yeah, I mean, you can throw a lot of that. That's a great point.
A&M going into Notre Dame, Oregon, Penn State, Indiana, Oregon. I actually thought that it was the opposite. That were some road teams. That it was more like the NFL. That's what we keep talking about is how the SEC and college football has kind of become NFL. Light.
NFL light.
And I don't know. I don't know if home field's worth as much as it used to be. I don't know.
Yeah. Well. I'm curious to find out. That's going to be a heck of a game.
All right, last question on the way out. We talked to a lot of coaches. CB wants to know, who would you include in the top tiers of SEC coaches? He says he has Kirby number 1 by himself and then wants to know who you have in tier 2. I'm going to open the floor and allow you to put whoever you want in tier 1 and then give me a tier 2 of SEC coaches.
Yeah, I mean, I think Kirby's unequivocally in his own tier.
Okay.
I would put DeBoer in that slot him right below that. It's funny because I think a lot of folks would immediately slide in Sark, but you look at Sark's resume and you look at who he's beaten and who he hadn't beaten. I think I'm going to slide him definitely below DeBoer and kind of put Sark in that Brian Kelly. Who am I forgetting here? I mean, I think Mike Elko I would put in that too. I think Mike Elko, even though his resume isn't that long, I think he's proven
Kiffin,
what he did at Duke.
Is Kiffin 2 or 3? Is he 2 or 3?
I think he's below that DeBoer tier. So I think I would put Kiffin, Brian Kelly, Sark, Elko, kind of all in that tier together.
Is Heupel getting thrown in there too, or do you have Heupel closer to DeBoer?
I would put
maybe
Heupel
below them, maybe below all of them. I don't know.
Yeah, you know what? I might actually put Heupel below that group in his own tier. So right there. So he's somewhere 5 or 6.
Wow.
Clark Lee, maybe a little right below there. I don't know.
I mean, I think if your answer is that tier 1 is Kirby, tier 2 is DeBoer, and no one else is there, I think that's kind of fair at this moment. Man, it's just crazy the way that one game has changed, because I feel like if we had done this last week before Tennessee lost to Alabama, I think you could make a case that Heupel deserves a little bit more love for what he's done over the last 7 or 8 years as a head coach. But I ain't got it in me to argue on his behalf right now.
Well, I included. I mean, think about that. We were talking about Brian Kelly getting shit canned. I mean, I think Brian Kelly's still a good coach, and if you look at the amount of 10-win seasons he's accumulated over the last 15 years, not many can rival that resume. But it is a Johnny-come-lately sport, and so while Kiffin has seen kind of his stature kind of ascend, you're seeing a guy like Brian Kelly kind of fall to the pack.
If Heupel goes 10-2 with Nico and then turns around, and if they do find their way to 10-2 with
he's definitely in
Aguilar.
that tier 3.
Yeah.
I would put him in that tier 3 for sure with Sark and those guys. And if Texas goes 8-4, you're going to drop Sark.
Yeah. I wonder. Yeah, I was going to say.
I don't know if you saw that. I mean, Arch Manning threw for 100-something yards on Saturday.
I saw that. I did check it on that, and it was one of the worst. Like I think one of the worst 8 performances of like X amount of years for a winning team or whatever. Like it was brutal. Okay, I came in talking about how Tennessee fans down on the hype man, and we ended it with Jesse being down on the hype man. We got some work to do, Vols. We got some work to do.
I got a middle of the pack, man. That's kind of where Tennessee is right now. So
it's fun. It's fun. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying you're wrong at all. I'd say a lot of Tennessee fans would agree with you right now. All right, Jesse, tell the people where they can find your work over on Surrender Cobra.
Yes, Surrender Cobra. Find me at Jesse R.E. Simonton on X, Surrender Cobra. At Substack, so come check it out. Be sure to like, subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, right? This slow mesh.
Yep.
Continue to listen, spread the word. John knows the rest.
Next week, we'll look at the comments from this past week where people give us their hottest college football take. I want to see if those takes. I want to give them a couple weeks to marinate and see if any of them get like blown up by the time we actually get to them. So,
all right, good deal.
We'll do that next week. All right, Jesse, appreciate you, brother. Talk to you next week.
All right, see you, man.
See ya. Sorry if I interrupted you a couple of times. There was a couple of times where your camera froze, so I didn't know if your internet was getting ready to go out, and I kind of hopped in, and then no worries.